Welcome to the Eye of Truth. If you're a fan of the channel, you've probably heard of a theory called the simulation hypothesis. The theory goes like this. Our world is a virtual reality. In other words, our world is not reality, but instead was created as a sort of simulation. This might seem like a wild conspiracy theory, similar to the flat earth theory. However, the simulation hypothesis actually has the support of many scientists and philosophers. Personally, I believe that the simulation hypothesis is very likely correct. In this video, I'll talk about the evidence we have for the simulation hypothesis, the reason why the theory is supported by some scientists, and why it's so likely that our world is a virtual reality. Be sure to stay with me until the end. The simulation hypothesis has its roots over 2,000 years ago. The ancient Greek philosopher Plato came up with the following thought experiment. A group of people imprisoned in a cave spend their whole lives allowed only to watch shadows of objects cast on the wall of the cave by their guards. These prisoners would believe the shadows themselves to be living things, rather than being cast from objects. They would believe the entire world was made from shadows, and would never know the true nature of the world. Nearly 600 years later, an ancient Chinese philosopher named Zhuangzi had the same thought. One day, Zhuangzi had a dream that he was a butterfly flitting and fluttering about. Upon waking, he spent some time in thought. Was being a butterfly just a dream? Or was he really a butterfly dreaming about being a man? This led Zhuangzi to argue that humans are incapable of drawing any distinction between reality and fantasy, and his butterfly dream gained widespread attention. The modern simulation hypothesis first began gaining attention when Elon Musk said the following in 2016.
If you assume any rate of improvement at all, then the games will become indistinguishable from reality. Then you just say, okay, well, let's imagine it's 10,000 years in the future, which is nothing in the evolutionary scale. So given that we're clearly on a trajectory to have games that are indistinguishable from reality, and those games could be played on any set-top box or on a PC or whatever, and there would probably be, billions of such, computers or set-top boxes, it would seem to follow that the odds that we're in base reality is 1 in billions.
Many people were surprised to hear this, and may have wondered what connection there is between advances in computer games and us existing in a virtual reality. It seems tenuous at first. Elon Musk kept his comment brief, so it might be a bit difficult to understand what he was trying to say. However, Nick Bostrom, a philosopher at the University of Oxford, provided a very logical explanation of the simulation hypothesis that's very easy to understand. His article, Are You Living in a Computer Simulation?, provides a rational discussion on the viability of the simulation hypothesis. He argues that, as computer technology improves, we will become able to use computers to simulate our world or even the universe. If the simulation is perfect, we can assume that the residents of that world would have consciousness. It would therefore be extremely likely that we, ourselves, are living in a simulated world. Why do both Musk and Bostrom believe the simulation hypothesis? Let's take a closer look. Assume that intelligent life has developed in the real world. These beings evolve over billions of years and gain access to advanced science and technology. They then use computers to try simulating their own world. This simulation would require 2 key components. They would need to recreate the same laws of physics present in the real world, and would need to create resonance with the same level of consciousness as the living things in the real world. It is a relatively simple matter to program a virtual reality with the same laws of physics of actual reality. We can do this today with our current level of science and technology. The difficult thing is to provide residents of a simulated world with consciousness. If we could use advanced technology to give the residents of the virtual reality the same level of consciousness as us in reality, the simulation would be perfected. The virtual reality would have the same laws of physics as the real world, and the residents of that reality would have the same level of consciousness as us in the real world. However, the residents of the virtual reality would not yet know that they were living in a virtual reality. After a long period of advancement, the residents of this virtual reality might at some point use computer technology to simulate a virtual reality. They could ultimately create a virtual reality within a virtual reality. If the virtual reality created by the civilization existing in actual reality is layer 1, this virtual reality within a virtual reality would be layer 2. Similarly, the civilization living in layer 2 might eventually create their own virtual reality. The number of virtual realities could increase infinitely. These virtual realities would have their own laws of physics and residents with their own consciousness, and in that sense wouldn't be much different from actual reality. All of these worlds would have likely been created from a single base reality. However, there could be an infinite number of virtual reality worlds. If these virtual reality worlds truly exist, then it is highly unlikely from a statistical point of view that our world exists in the single actual reality. This is the logic underpinning the simulation hypothesis. However, it was an exaggeration for Elon Musk to state that there's a 1 in billions chance we're in base reality. People have argued that it is not very likely that we are currently living in a virtual reality. This is because we don't know whether it's even possible to perfectly reproduce human consciousness with computer technology. In fact, we don't even know what consciousness really is. However, even if we discover the true nature of consciousness, we don't know whether it could be reproduced by computers. What if we become able to perfectly reproduce human consciousness several thousands or tens of thousands of years in the future? Only then could we state without exaggeration that we're definitely living in a virtual reality. Why? If we could simulate consciousness, that would mean that people from the future would also be able to create a virtual reality nearly identical to this world. As mentioned earlier, an infinite number of virtual worlds would be created from layer 1. It would therefore be highly unlikely from a statistical point of view for our world to exist in the single actual reality. We know that we cannot create consciousness using current computer technology, so you're probably wondering whether our world is real or a simulation. Let's do some analysis. If our world is a virtual reality created by a computer, we would expect to see the unique characteristics of computers and programming reflected to some degree in the natural laws of the world. Let's see if we can find any of these characteristics in our world. First, we all know that our world is subject to the laws of physics. However, there's something peculiar about one of these laws. That law is the principle of constancy of light velocity. Light will always travel at 300,000 kilometers per second in a vacuum, regardless of the situation. Now, let's imagine you are traveling forward at the speed of light. If you were to aim a flashlight forward and turn it on, you'd expect the light from the flashlight to appear to an outside bystander to be traveling at twice the speed of light, or 600,000 kilometers per second. However, the laws of physics do not allow for this to happen. The light from the flashlight would still appear to travel at 300,000 kilometers per second. This is the exact opposite of what you'd expect. Physicists are at a loss to explain this phenomenon. However, this makes perfect sense if our world is a virtual reality simulated by a computer. There's a limit to how fast a computer can run. If the computer used to simulate our world has a speed limit, then that would be reflected somehow within the world. One possibility is that there's a universal speed limit in our world, and that limit is the speed of light. Nothing in this world, not even information, can travel faster than the speed of light. This speed limit could be the maximum speed at which the computer simulating our world can process information. According to quantum mechanics, tiny particles such as photons and electrons exist in an indefinite state of speed and location when not observed by us. The state of a particle becomes definite only when we observe it. We are unable to explain this phenomenon, just like how we are unable to explain the principle of constancy of light velocity. However, the simulation hypothesis provides a simple explanation. In order to reduce the processing load of the computer simulating our world, anything not observed by us is culled. The load on the computer could be reduced to a mere fraction if it only processes information observed by us. Interestingly, modern computer games operate exactly in this way. Information for locations not seen or visited by the player is not processed and rendered. The computer begins processing this information only the moment the player looks at it. Let's consider things from an even more fundamental level. Have you ever realized how strange mathematics is? We can represent many things in the world using mathematics. What's more, we can even use mathematics to predict things that haven't been discovered yet. This is because mathematics is really a tool or language for reproducing logic. We can use mathematics to represent and predict the laws of physics because the laws of physics operate based on logic. A computer program also depends on logic. Although there are many different programming languages, they all operate on logic. If our world was created by a computer program, our mathematics would represent the logic of that program. Physics, then, would be the study of the logic by which that program runs. You may be familiar with the Big Bang theory, which argues that the universe was created in a Big Bang prior to which nothing existed, not even matter, time, or space. Although we don't know why the Big Bang occurred from nothing, the simulation hypothesis provides an easy explanation. The world of the characters in the computer game simply didn't exist prior to the game being created, just like the universe prior to the Big Bang. In other words, the Big Bang is the moment that the game world was created. I mentioned in my video about alien civilizations that a civilization could never go beyond a Type 6 civilization, no matter how hard it tried. That's because the Type 7 creator civilization is the civilization that created that virtual reality. Characters in a game could never travel outside the game or become the people that created the game, no matter how powerful they become. In a previous video, I discussed the existence of something called the Akashic records, which is a record of all information and knowledge in the universe. The simulation hypothesis can account for this. If our world is being simulated by a computer, all the information for that simulation would of course be contained within that computer. If we could gain access to the information contained in its database, we could learn everything about our world. Of course, this is all just conjecture on my part. As I mentioned earlier, it's not very likely that the simulation hypothesis is correct right now. But even if we are all living in a virtual reality, it wouldn't bother me. If our virtual reality was created based on the laws of physics of the real world, and we have the same level of consciousness as life forms in the real world, then there wouldn't be much of a difference between our virtual reality and the real world. In the movie The Matrix, one of the characters discovers the horrible reality of the true world and decides that he'd rather stay in virtual reality. If our civilization reaches the point where we can prove that the simulation hypothesis is correct, there's no way to predict how people would take it or how society would be affected. It's said that, based on the speed at which computer technology is advancing, we will reach technological singularity in 2045. Technological singularity refers to a point in time where the creation of some new technology will bring about massive changes to everything. People have suggested a wide range of technologies that might bring about technological singularity, but I think the most likely event to cause this will be the creation of consciousness through computer technology. Once we can successfully use computer technology to create consciousness, it will prove with nearly 100% certainty that we're living in a virtual reality. When this happens, how will people's lives and values change? It's a fascinating thought. Thank you for watching.